Welcome to Free and Equal TV. I'm Christina Tobin, the founder of the Free and Equal Elections Foundation, coming to you live from San Juan, Puerto Rico. And I don't know what state I'm going to be in tomorrow, but I think I'm going. We had Sean Stone and G. Edward Griffin. Today we have Richard Winger. He is really the leading election law, one of the leading election law experts throughout the United States, an American political activist and analyst. He's the publisher and editor of Ballot Access News and sits on the editorial board of the Election Law Journal. Winger publishes analysts. Winger is widely regarded as an expert on ballot access and election law, as well as on the topic of third parties throughout the United States. Though not a lawyer, Winger testifies in court cases and legislative hearings and is a source for both the media and political organizers. It's a long intro. We've got a lot going on here, Richard. He has published the Wall Street Journal of Election Law, the Fordham Law Review, American Reviews of Politics, California Journal, and other publications, and has appeared as a commentator on ballot access on NBC, ABC, CNN, and NPR. Finally, since 1985, Winger's published Ballot Access News, a monthly newsletter covering development in ballot access and among American minor parties generally. Welcome, Richard, to Free and Equal TV. It's great to have you today.
Okay, Christina, it's really nice to see you. I'm grateful to be here.
Oh, it's really nice to see you soon. And I'm going to go right into the question. And I hope in the future we can have more audience questions. I'm going to welcome that as we're really building out Free and Equal TV in real live time to see those questions come in. But I really want I gave you a really detailed intro, and I've been traveling a lot. I've actually been on a boat the last 5 days, off the grounds for 4 days, so I'm still grounding today. So my intros might be a little blurry, but I'm here doing it, still recovering from being off the grid for days. So Richard, I would love for you to share with our audience, when you were young, did you ever imagine, and you'd probably be too humble to say this, but you are, that you would grow up to be one of the top ballot access experts in the United States and America?
Well, it is kind of funny. When I was in high school, we, of course, like any high school in the U.S., had student body elections. And I remember for some reason the high school administration said you had to have a petition to run for student body office, and that was fine. I think you needed 25 signatures. But then all of a sudden, out of the blue, right in the middle of our petitioning period, the high school said, oh, we decided that if somebody already signed somebody else's petition, they can't sign for you. Well, that made it a lot harder. So I remember even way back then in high school complaining about that rule. So it sort of was prophetic in a way. And by the way, the high school administration gave in.
They did.
Yeah.
Well, you are really one of the leading. You've testified, is it over 350 cases, 400 cases this last how many years? How long have you been focused on the issue of ballot access in America?
The first time I ever testified in a state legislative election law committee hearing was when I was in college in 1967. And the first time I ever did it in court was 1971. So it's been a long time. The truth is I'm getting kind of tired of it, but I'll just have to buck up because I'm sorry to say this is one of the worst years for democracy I've ever seen. It's incredible. State legislators, they seem like they have such a lust for power. There's state legislature after state legislature that is making our elections less democratic. They're especially attacking the initiative process. It's a gloomy year. I hate to be a downer, but we can get into that if you want.
I would like to hear more about what really is both parties at it. Tell me what they're doing that is not democratic, or republic for that matter.
Well, I don't usually worry a lot about the initiative process because there's other people that do that. Paul Jacob, my friend, has tried to defend the initiative process for decades. This is a terrible year for initiatives. The Florida legislature passed a law that, okay, it takes about 400,000 signatures to get an initiative on the ballot in Florida. Well, you just cannot do it, unfortunately, without a ton of money. And they passed a law saying nobody could give more than $3,000 to the group that's working on the initiative. Well, it's just impossible to get something like that on the ballot if you don't have rich people giving you a lot of money. That's just the way it is. But even worse than that, just 4 days ago, the Mississippi Supreme Court, in a 6-3 ruling, wiped out Mississippi's initiative process. It's in the Constitution. And they said, because there's a little picky flaw in it, and it's been there for 20 years, all of a sudden they said the initiative is kaput. It's gone. You can't use it anymore. I don't know if you want me to get into the detail or not, but
do you feel like there's a tie, I'm just guessing, with the recent recall initiative happening in California, and they hit the numbers, to recall Newsom to be kicked out of office? Do you think that may have had some sort of impact on what's happening in Florida and Mississippi? That's my gut saying.
No, the initiative and the recall are really two different things.
But isn't it taking a referendum? Well, they're two different things. Okay, referendum.
There's three different things.
Oh, can you clarify that, what they are?
A referendum is when the legislature passes something that the people don't like. They can circulate a petition and suspend that new law until the voters get a chance to weigh in on it. That's a referendum. The initiative is when ordinary people want a law changed and the legislature won't pay any attention, so they just circulate a petition to get their idea on the ballot. What triggered it in Mississippi was people circulated an initiative to legalize medical marijuana, and it got on the ballot. It had enough valid signatures, and it passed overwhelmingly, about 2-1. So after it passed 2-1, along comes the Mississippi Supreme Court and says, well, we don't think the petition followed the law, and therefore, even though the voters already voted on it, it's gone. It's wiped out. And
that makes sense. Thanks for clarifying. And the recall being the third, we're aware of what that is. And so medical marijuana in Mississippi, what happened in Florida? Why so quickly are they just pretty much, making it very challenging to get a referendum initiative, that is?
There's about 4 initiatives that the voters passed. The voters got it on the ballot. The legislature didn't like it, and these ideas passed. And the Republicans who have a majority in the Florida legislature didn't like it, so they're determined to stop it in the future.
Wow, what were the 4 things that passed? Do you recall? Just curious.
The one I remember best was a wonderful measure that passed a few years ago. It changed the law that said if you'd ever been convicted of a felony anywhere in the world, you could not register to vote in Florida unless you got special permission from the governor.
That was a big one.
Yeah, and it passed with 65%. But they didn't say it was invalid, but they interpreted it to mean, well, okay, that passed. However, we think if you're an ex-felon and you have court costs that you never paid off, or if you owe restitution that you never paid off, or if you had a fine that you never paid off, you still can't register to vote. Well, most people who are in that position, they didn't even know if they qualified or not. So then people were intimidated and they were afraid to register. So unfortunately, most of the people who were ex-felons, it didn't help them.
Yeah, being in the mindset of feeling like they already had a lot of things against them. It's hard to come out of prison and be optimistic about being a voter when you're just trying to get by. And you be able to get a job and say, oh, you have to have all your fines paid off. probably most or almost all that had any fines going to jail in the first place, they're not in a position right away to be able to pay off those fines. So that does, this is just another prime example. I know people have been very positive about the government in Florida for other reasons, but you dig deeper, and it's just these Democrats and Republicans alike. It's not even about the party. It's just about these individuals. If you follow the money, the ones that are about the money, about control, about doing and self-serving themselves to make sure they get reelected over and over again. And these actions that are going on with the initiative process is just unacceptable. It is. So thank you for bringing that up. I'll definitely want to have Paul Jacob of Citizens in Charge on the live Free and Equal TV in the future, because I remember meeting him when I was 13 years old at my dad's office. My dad's been fighting against taxes for over 45 years with Taxpayers United of America, Jim Tobin, and Paul Jacob, when he was, a youngin', he was working with my dad. My dad hired him to do the initiative for term limits. You may recall that back in, I think, the 90s, early 90s, I want to say.
He was active then.
Oh, yep. Yes. So it's, no. Mm-hmm.
He really suffered for his political activism. He got an initiative on the ballot in Oklahoma, and Oklahoma at the time made it illegal for out-of-state people to be petitioners. So because he arranged for out-of-state petitioners, he was physically arrested and handcuffed, taken to prison. However, fortunately, the 10th Circuit ruled that law unconstitutional. So of course, that saved him. And he served time in prison when he was very young because he refused to register for the draft. So he's a lot braver than I am. I was once with a friend in San Francisco who had been kicked off the ballot unjustly. In order to be on the general election ballot, she had to get a certain number of write-ins in the primary. And at first she was told she did. And then a week later, the Registrar of Voters called her up and said, "I'm sorry, Miss Baum. The city attorney says I wasn't supposed to have counted the write-ins where people wrote you in, but then they forgot to make an X after your name. So when we take away those votes, you don't have enough." So she was so mad, she went to the Registrar of Voters office and sat in with her friends. And some of the friends were like me. We went with her, but once they came to arrest people, I will never forget it. I didn't realize how scary that would be. And I'm one of the people that melted away. I didn't want to get arrested. So some of us just left, but others, they got arrested. They got handcuffs put on, put away in the paddy wagon. So I really respect these people that have the courage to go ahead and get themselves arrested.
It's even those that don't get arrested, there's so much intimidation. A story I've never shared with anybody was back in, I think 2002, was it? When my dad ran for lieutenant governor. He ran in '98 for governor, and as you know, very well know, was wrongfully knocked off the ballot. I learned at that time third parties and independents had to get, I was 17 years of age. I was like, why do third parties and independents have to get 5 times more signatures, 25,000 signatures versus only 5,000 for Ds and Rs? And my dad had turned in over 60,000 signatures, and the hearing officer recommended he be placed on the ballot, and the State Board of Elections knocked him off the ballot. And Dad sued the Supreme Court, and he unfortunately lost that lawsuit, about $1 million lawsuit. He had one big backer behind him for that. And 4 years later, I came in as my dad's ballot access coordinator when he ran for lieutenant governor. So I gathered on a petition board. Sometimes I'd carry 5 petition boards at once. I mean, just hardcore, and gathered, I think, well over 5 or 10,000 signatures for my dad while overseeing the ballot drive in 2002. But Richard, there was this time, I mean, I was like 21, 22, and there was this heavy knock on the door on the front of the building, and my dad went downstairs. He could see it was police officers. And they were asking for me, I mean, in my early 20s, and claiming that I was fraudulently gathering signatures, which is just absurd. They were doing this towards every single signature gather. I mean, it was just to experience that at a young age for many people would be maybe leaning more traumatic. But for me, it's just, I was younger and I had more of that anger in me and upset. These days, it's more of a will to make things right and fix things, from more of a loving, compassionate, but it's been a process to get there. So I feel you. And this is what they do. They intimidate, and sometimes they do arrest, when you have, like with Paul Jacob, which is just so wrong, is the nicest way of putting that. So I wanted to shift from initiatives to ballot access, Richard. Question I have here, and well, they are different, but I would like to hear your words in detail. Are requirements different from your traditional political parties, such as Republicans and Democrats, as far as ballot access requirements from third parties, the like Libertarian, Green, or even, independent candidates?
Sir, every once in a great while, something odd happens, and the Democratic Party and the Republican Party fails to get enough votes to stay on the ballot. They always immediately fix the law. The last time it happened was in Virginia in 1990, when the Democratic Party decided not to run anybody for U.S. Senate against the incumbent Republican, because he was kind of a liberal Republican and very popular. And they thought, there's no way we're going to beat him. It was Elizabeth Warren's, the movie star Elizabeth Taylor's husband, Senator Warner. There's been several Senator Warners in Virginia. This was John Warner. So the Democrats said, okay, we're not going to run anybody for senator. They forgot that the definition of a qualified party in Virginia at the time was a group that had got 10% of the vote for any statewide race. And senator was the only office up that year. So too late, they realized they're not going to be a qualified party anymore. But no problem. They called the legislature into special session and changed the law. So it was a group that had got 10% at either of the last two elections. That's happened about 6 times in history. But boy, I'd like to talk about what the New York government did last year. They took the standard definition of a political party, which is a group that had polled 50,000 votes for governor, and expanded it so you have to get 130,000 votes for president and governor. So, pow, as soon as that went into effect, the Libertarian Party and the Green Party are off the ballot. Then they also raised the number of signatures needed for Greens and Libertarians and others to get back on the ballot. So they raised it from 15,000 signatures for the statewide slate and oodles of other petitions for all the other offices to 45,000. So now New York State has the 3rd highest number of signatures for president. It's the only state left where it's illegal for out-of-state circulators to work. It's got the shortest petitioning period, only 6 weeks. And there was one more.
During winter.
Pardon?
I recall it being during winter.
Yeah, oh, that's the 4th thing. They went and moved the petition deadline from August to May. So you have to do it in, well, it's not quite winter, it's spring. You have to do it in April and May. And unfortunately, we got a really hostile U.S. District Court judge. I don't know why he's so hostile, but he upheld all of those things. And in his opinion, he left out all of those 4 things that I just said. He only mentioned bad precedents. He didn't mention any good precedents. That's a sign of a bad decision. Judges are supposed to include a discussion of precedents on both sides, but he didn't. And I heard the oral argument. He was like another attorney for the state. He wouldn't let our lawyer talk, or when our lawyer did talk, he would insult him. I don't want to make a personal attack against one particular judge. I don't know why he's so hostile. But anyway, now we're in bad shape in New York. We'll have to appeal. So it's pretty gloomy. It's not the only state that's made ballot access worse recently either. We've got a scary situation in Nevada right now where there's a bill that's passed 2 committees to make it much more difficult for third parties to get in the ballot. And already no third party had got in the ballot in Nevada in 10 years. The Green Party, it was one of only 6 states where Jill Stein couldn't get in the ballot in 2016. But we've been fighting it in the press, and it was supposed to have come up in the full Senate yesterday, and the sponsor put it off. Then it was supposed to have come up today, and she put it off again. So we're getting our hopes up that she doesn't have the votes to get it through the legislature. I should be quiet now and let you talk.
I love the depth. And can you share in the middle, and I'll ask also at the end of this interview, where people can find this information, your website for Ballot Access News?
Okay, just Google Ballot Access News and you'll come up with my webpage, which is a blog.
I mean, it's for our audience out there, you can see here we have literally a breathing encyclopedia of electoral reform right here, Richard Winger. And when you go on Ballot Access News, what he just told us is just a real little snippet of what he is aware of going on, regarding our electoral issues, particularly ballot access, but obviously initiatives as well, and so on. And so, Richard, I mean, to really be more specific on my last question, what's the requirement to get on the ballot for Democratic and Republican presidential candidates versus third party and independents?
Well, because the Democratic and Republican parties are on the ballot automatically in all 50 states, once somebody is nominated for president by one of those parties, he or she doesn't have to do anything to be on the November ballot. The presidential candidate doesn't even need to file any paperwork. Instead, the state party, the Democratic and Republican Party in each state, they turn in a list of presidential elector candidates to the Secretary of State. That just essentially means writing a letter naming the electors, and pow, that's all it takes. But boy, an independent, like I'll mention Brock Pierce, he was an independent presidential candidate, and he spent a lot of money. He worked very hard, but as I recall, I think he only got on the ballot in 15 states. I'm sorry, I don't know that exact, but
I recall it was about there, 14, yeah. 15.
So,
and that takes how many signatures? I think it's well over 700,000, right? To go on the ballot in all 50 states plus DC for an independent candidate.
Actually, it's a little better than that. If you use the easier method in each state, it's more like 500,000. But you have to be, every state has procedures for independent presidential candidates, and every state has procedures for minor party presidential candidates. But a smart candidate picks the easier one. I mean, the laws don't make any sense. Like in North Carolina, if you're a minor party, you need a petition of about 13,000 signatures, which is kind of hard, but it's doable. But if you're an independent presidential candidate, you need about 60,000 signatures. That makes no sense. Furthermore, if you're an independent presidential candidate, the deadline for all the signatures is in March. But a minor party petition, it's not due until May or June. So we had a lawsuit against the independent presidential petition deadline. And I'm so sorry to say, even though the Supreme Court already ruled in 1983 that early petition deadlines for independent presidential candidates are unconstitutional, and even though the Supreme Court in 1983 said March 20th was too early, the Fourth Circuit said March 3rd is okay. They just totally went against precedent. And then we asked the Supreme Court to take that case, and they wouldn't. In fact, the Supreme Court has rejected all ballot access cases filed by minor parties or independent candidates for 30 years. There's no member of the Supreme Court that cares about this issue. So we're sort of dependent on hoping we get good lower court judges, and sometimes we do. I don't want to be too gloomy. We've won 2 huge cases in lower courts this year already. It's not all bad news.
Can you tell us about those cases we've won?
Well, it was so wonderful. Both decisions came down on March 29th, the same day by coincidence. We won a stunning decision in Michigan in the Sixth Circuit. They threw out 30,000 signatures for statewide independent candidates. And they did it because the law's been in existence since 1988, and all those years, only 2 statewide independent petitions succeeded. So they said, well, it's obviously too hard. So they were a great panel. And boy, we won against Georgia's law on how minor party and independent candidates get on the ballot for U.S. House, which was a petition of about 25,000 signatures. And that is so hard that no minor party had ever done it, and that law had existed since 1943, and no independent had done it since 1964. Boy, that felt good to finally beat that law. We've been trying for decades and decades and decades, but we got a good judge.
That's great to hear. And so it's been quite something. I really worked closely and got to know you better probably around the 2008 time, working for Ralph Nader in Ballot Access, and that was a Herculean task to take on. I remember that April I was a state coordinator, maybe February, March, and a month later turned out, I guess, got promoted, to national Ballot Access coordinator, and oversaw all moving parts for that campaign. And you were such a catalyst and a hero in helping me alongside reach the finish line for all 45 states plus DC. So I want to thank you for that.
You did great. You did a fabulous job. For Nader to get on the ballot in 45 states, even though he was an independent and not the nominee of any party, was phenomenal. That was the most states he ever got on in his 4 runs. Even in 2000, when he was at the peak of his popularity, he only got on in 43. So for him to get on in 45 was, and furthermore, in 2004, I think he only got on in 34. So that was a huge leap up.
It might have been 32 states in 04. I recall the Democratic Party challenging and successfully knocking off the ballot in so many states that brought him down to 32.
Yeah.
So in 08 was just taking on that task. Even Ralph Nader himself, being relentless, really messaged that there was just no way it could be done. I said, it will be done, Ralph. Just trust the strategy. It's not the strategy incorporated is very, there's no box around how I operate. It's just doing what's right and getting more voices and more choices on the ballot. But I just want to take a moment and thank you for being that, again, catalyst and that hero alongside to help me through the challenges of being on the ground in Illinois and then Pennsylvania and then New York and Connecticut, and overcoming the odds over and over and over and over again. It was quite a task. And actually that job, and I would have done it for Dr. Ron Paul as well, but he told us directly the number one reason he didn't run for president in 08 is because of the restrictive ballot access barriers for independent candidates. That's why he didn't run as an independent, that is, in 08 for president. So that was very insightful to learn. I get it, I understand it. And so just to go through this initiative and ballot access, and we could go into so many other topics like alternative voting methods, gerrymandering. Did you have some idea, proportional representation? Did you have some thoughts on those topics, whichever one appeals to you or all of them?
There's a congressman from Virginia who any day now, I believe, is going to introduce a very good bill to provide for multi-member U.S. House districts combined with ranked choice voting. When you combine ranked choice voting with multiple winners, that is a form of proportional representation. And that would give a much higher percentage of the voters real representation. So many US House districts in this country are totally safe for the Republican Party or the Democratic Party. And so the minority of the two major parties, there's hardly anything they can do about it. But if we had multi-member districts in which members of several parties could get elected through proportional representation, we'd have so many more voters represented, and it would be so much better. It's Congressman Don Beyer. I'm not sure how he pronounces his name, but it's Bayer. So I'm looking forward to that.
Can you break down briefly for those who don't understand the multi-member districts, how ranked choice voting works, how that's tied to proportional representation? Can you break that down? I recall that over 85 countries, it might be more now, have proportional representation. How many now? What is it for our viewers that aren't aware?
Well, roughly speaking, in proportional representation, if a party can get 6% of the popular vote, it can get 6% of the seats. And practically every country in Western and Central Europe uses proportional representation. Every time there's an objective list of the best countries in the world, and there are many such lists, some people just get a kick out of compiling that, invariably, at least 9 of the 10 best countries are countries with proportional representation. Now, there's a lot of different kinds of proportional representation. Some people that are hostile to proportional representation, they enjoy pointing to Israel and saying, well, look, it doesn't work very well in Israel. Well, Israel has had a hard time in the last few years because they've had about 3 or 4 elections in the past 2 years, but they have trouble putting together a government. So I have a friend who doesn't like proportional representation. So all he will do is talk about Israel, and he ignores dozens and dozens of other countries that are quite successful that have it. It's a big topic, and one organization that works for proportional representation is fairvote.org. So anybody can Google Fair Vote if they're interested in the topic.
Yeah, we'll definitely, like Paul Jacob, we'll definitely reach out and have Rob Ritchie of Fair Vote on Free and Equal TV. Big fan of those two gentlemen and the work that they've done, and commend Fair Vote for their work with proportional representation, also implementing ranked choice voting. I guess I could really get Rob Ritchie on here so you can really dive deep into that, but it's just so apparent that singular vote, what we currently have here in the US, is the worst thing we could have when it comes to the voting system. And there's a reason why we have it, because that's what helps keep getting the Democrats and Republicans elected over and over again. Okay, so that's tied to ballot access. We have these challenging ballot access, restricted ballot access barriers. So it makes it easier, or for these Ds and Rs that get reelected over and over again. We don't have proportional representation. Sure, Israel in itself is sort of an exception from the rest of the world, I feel, with what they have going on there energetically. But let's look at the good that PR has done, which is pretty much across the board entirely the case. We don't have that in America, because if we had it, it'd be difficult for the same candidates to keep getting reelected over and over again. So it goes on and on. Voting methods, why we don't have maybe even blockchain voting. Gosh, that would be a good question I want to ask you about, is your thoughts on blockchain voting. That would be, I had a note here. Well, I guess, where is it? I thought I did have it in here. Well, what are your thoughts? Do you feel blockchain will be adopted as a form of election voting?
I'm going to pass on that because I don't know anything about it.
Oh, you're going to learn in Cambria, July 3rd, 4th.
I'll enjoy
that. All right.
But I do want to mention technically you're supposed to say gerrymandering, but most people say gerrymandering. That's a huge problem too.
Wow, gerrymandering. Okay.
The reason it's supposed to be called gerrymandering is it's named for Elbridge Gerry, and he pronounced his name Gary, Gerry. But anyway, the Supreme Court did a terrible thing a couple of years ago. and it's the Chief Justice's fault. John Roberts, he wrote an opinion saying partisan gerrymandering, I'm going to say gerrymandering because that's what most people say. He said that can't be adjudicated in court because it's impossible to have a fair system. So we're just giving up. And that's absurd. They could have at least ruled that every state has to have a nonpartisan commission draw the districts. They could have done that, but they didn't. And now we have state after state where the state legislatures, as soon as they get the census data, it's coming in a few weeks, they are going to do it again. They're going to draw congressional districts where it's more of a problem in Republican states. They're gonna, like in Ohio, they're gonna have all the Democrats packed into a handful of districts, and then Republicans will be in the majority in about 3/4 of the districts. So even though it's a 50-50 state, the Republicans will win 3/4 of the seats. They're gonna do it all over the country. We're probably gonna have a 2022 election where if you add up all the votes for US House, there will be more Democratic votes than Republican votes. But it's looking like we're going to have a Republican majority in the House after the 2022 election. That's just so wrong. And I don't want to excuse the Democrats here. They do gerrymandering in the states they control too. They do bad things in ballot access. It's Democrats that are to blame for what's going on in New York and Nevada. But I must say, the Republican Party is right now, it's worse. And we haven't even talked about all the bills around the country where they're making it more difficult for people to cast a vote. That's a huge topic. And I don't know how much time we have.
I would love to, if you have a little more time, I just want to keep learning more about this. I wasn't aware of that in 2022, and it feels like, you know, when you're talking about all the different topics from ballot access, which you've been working to reduce the last 30, 40, 45 years maybe now, right? With ballot access news, how long has it been around?
Let's see, 35 years.
35 years, and it feels like there's kind of a word I picked up on this trip here this last week is that there's really a rhythm, right? This rhythm of back and forth, the tug of war between the D's and R's, and it's like, oh, one's a little more problematic this cycle and another one this cycle, but let's remember this is a business and we are not invited to the party, as in the independents. We are left out in the cold, and I take these quotes from even James Bennett, the author of Not Invited to the Party, how the Demopublicans have rigged the system and left independents out in the cold. And I take the title of that book to heart because it is so true. And so when you talk about 2022 and you know, the Republicans and gerrymandering, it's a game. It's a game. And you know, Dr. Ron Paul, you know, having been a former congressman, said these guys are buddies behind the scenes, the Democrats and Republicans. They work together. I mean, it's a game that's the people, the ones who are paying the highest cost are we the people. And this game, it needs to end, and it will end. I foresee independents coming out in numbers like never before, and an idea and a movement coming that once it comes, nothing will get in the way. So thank you for that insight. Please continue what you wanted to talk about, going into deeper in that topic. So I just wanted to respond to you.
Well, there's, and I'm not fully up in the details, but several Republican-controlled legislatures this year have passed bills that take away authority from local election boards and transfer it to a state election board. It's going to be a big problem in Georgia. The new law, Senate Bill 202, says the state can take away all the power from county election boards anytime they feel like it and transfer all their authority to a state election board, which is a partisan body controlled totally by the Republican Party. And people are very worried about that because, believe me, county election boards in this country in general are good people. They know their business, they're professionals. They are trying their best to put on an honest count, a well-run election, help voters, and for these states to pass laws taking away their power to administer their own elections and transfer it to a partisan state body, that's gonna make things even worse. I just, there's so many problems in this country with elections. I almost feel bad that I'm going to leave out something, and I'll regret it later. It's almost overwhelming. You know, my whole adult life, I've never really worried about this country. I thought it was basically pretty okay. For the first time in my life, I'm extremely worried about the United States. If we cannot run honest elections that people know are honest, and people have no faith in the system, we're just going to descend into the lowest point since the Civil War. Oh, I hate to be so gloomy, but and furthermore, the Democrats, they hold themselves out as heroes, but they're not. They are selfish too. They just passed, the House passed H.R. 1, which takes away public funding from minor party presidential candidates. And fortunately, that bill is not going to pass the Senate, but the big media ignores that issue. I'm just kind of, you're going to have to control me here.
Here's the optimist in me, and also, as you know, being a realist, is that these are signs that the Democrats and Republicans are worried. I mean, they're pushing harder than ever because they know they have got to like chain up and mask themselves up. Who knows? I mean, or the people, right? So, but in any case, and because, I mean, we're coming. Like, there's something that's going to rise here like never before. And you see around the world, have you seen that video of England? London coming 50, 60, however more thousands of people out in public, no mask on, saying, hey, no to the vaccine passport. And the song to it, a revolution is coming. I like to say an evolution is coming because we can drop the R, go right into evolution. Technology is the game changer, and really rise together in a peaceful faction and replace these candidates alike. So I'm just going to say, wait it out till July 3rd, 4th, and come feel what's going to be happening in Cambria. I'm so honored to have you be a speaker, my hero, really, and mentor, Richard Winger of Ballot Access News, and come feel the energy in the local community of Cambria, where I've lived almost 10 years now. We have our co-hosts, the Brock Pierce Foundation, Independent National Union, Open the Debates, our co-host of our United We Stand Festival, as well as sponsors to be announced on national and local levels, businesses coming on board for United We Stand. So all the proceeds go back to the kids of the Cambria Skate Park Initiative, where their skate park was torn down by the Cambria Community Service District. And it just shows a disconnect on a local level. Candidates from the CCSD tearing down a kid's skate park without even running it by the community and telling the kids a new skate park is going to be rebuilt, and it wasn't rebuilt. And these kids have raised over $200,000 or close to of their $400,000 goal to build this skate park. But the bigger vision, Richard, is building out into a 2024 presidential debate tour. So I just am excited. It's going to be up to 10 stops. The United We Stand Festival will present that tour, and we'll also have our blockchain election assistant voting app implemented into that tour, which will have instant runoff voting, where the people can decide, kind of American Idol style, who will be in the first, second, third, and so on round of debates. So coalition's forming, Richard, and I look forward to working with you really closely. I definitely have it in my blood to help get multiple potential independent presidential candidates on the ballot in 24, 28, if needed, once Free and Equal and United We Stand continues to stabilize more, which I foresee happening. So I would be honored to continue working with you, and I'm so excited for you to come to Cambria, because it will shift, and you will see, Richard, that There are more of us than them, and we're going to rise together, and we're going to do this. And I can see this happening. The blockchain voting is the key. It's going to transform elections and bring about political transparency. So, Richard, did you have any final words for our audience out there, and let them know where they again can find Ballot Access News and you, and even subscribe to your newsletter, which is just this wealth of knowledge? Please let people know. And also, if you have any final thoughts for the American people.
Okay, well, anybody that wants to subscribe to the print issue of Ballot Access News, it's only $18. So if you just Google Ballot Access News, you'll find out how to do that on the web page. And thank you so much for what you're doing, Christina. I'm so glad you're relatively young. Here you mentioned 2028. Boy, it's hard to think about the future that far in advance, but I know you're up to it. So thanks for having me, and I'll look forward to Cambria.
I'm looking forward to having you there, and I look forward to one day making sure this wealth of knowledge that's behind you and around you, people don't even see all the books. I've been to that office where you're at, and to have it archived electronically so that people have access to it. That is a nonprofit idea is going to happen. I'm manifesting to work with you. If I am the chosen one to be able to do that. And yes, I'm here to help. It's a baton, it's just holding it for this little couple seconds here on Earth and putting all this work that I'm simply a visionary and the people are building, the whole Free and Equal team. I mean, okay, I've done ballot access drives and organization, but it's happening with Free and Equal at a level I've never seen before. And I'm so happy to know that this decades that I've devoted to this and manifested is actually coming true, because there were moments there I'm like, okay, is this like what I'm to do? And I'm glad I stuck through it. And you were key. You were key. There were some moments where I remember calling you, and I don't cry too often, but I remember having a pretty big tear with you of how challenging working in the political world and parties and third parties is. The trust there is very much lacking, and I'm excited to move forward and having a party and a celebration to bring our nation together. So thank you. I'm just excited to talk to you. So please support Richard Winger of Ballot Access News, and I'll see you in a few months in Cambria. Thank you for coming, Richard.
Okay, thanks for doing this. I enjoyed it. Okay.